He didn't plan to be here, not on this ship, not over these waters, not writing what he was about to write. Weeks earlier, he'd sent his wife and 4 daughters ahead to Europe. He was to follow once his business allowed it. Then a telegram reached him. 2 words from his wife. Saved alone. The ship they were on collided with another in the middle of the Atlantic. It sank in under 30 minutes. His wife survived. His daughters did not. The captain came to him partway across the ocean, told him they were passing, as near as anyone could calculate, directly over the place where his daughters went under. He went below, and he wrote. Not a year before, he'd lost almost everything he owned in the fire that leveled Chicago. Now this. No sin he could name. No warning he'd ignored. Just loss, stacked on loss, with no ledger that balanced. When peace, like a river, attendeth my way. What he wrote that night became a hymn sung in churches for 150 years since. Most who sing it don't know where it was written. Fewer still ask the question underneath it. If obedience is supposed to bring the harvest, what do you call this? Long before Spafford, before any hymn, there was a promise. Simple, almost like a transaction. Obey, and the land will feed you. Obey, and you eat well. Obey, and the ground gives back what you put into it. It's the kind of promise a farmer understands instinctively. Plant, tend, harvest. Cause, then effect. And for a long time, that's how obedience worked. Not just for a nation, but in the quiet arithmetic most of us run without noticing. Do right, and things go right. Fall out of line, and the harvest fails. It's not a foolish belief. It's woven through the whole story. Blessing follows faithfulness. Curses follow rebellion. Moses says it. The prophets repeat it. Entire generations built their expectations of God around it. Which is exactly why it's so easy to flip the equation. If blessing means obedience, then hardship must mean the opposite. If the land feeds the obedient, then a life gone hungry, however that hunger shows up, starts to look like proof. Proof of failure. Proof of some debt still outstanding. Most people never examine this logic. They just live inside it, quietly scoring themselves against a harvest they can't see, waiting to find out where they went wrong. We might call it the Mosaic Ledger, the quiet belief that every blessing is a reward, and every sorrow is God balancing an account. Most of us don't know we're carrying it. We simply assume that's how God works. Once that ledger settles into the imagination, suffering is no longer just painful. It becomes evidence. Evidence that somewhere, somehow, God is collecting. It doesn't stay theoretical for long. It moves in, sits down at the table with you. He'd smoked for 20 years, knowing exactly what it cost. He'd quit, stayed clean a decade. Then the diagnosis came anyway. And somewhere in the diagnosis was an old voice, the one that had warned him decades ago. You knew, and you did it anyway. Except his friend from those years still smokes. Never quit, never got sick, golfs on weekends. No debt collected from him at all. Or the woman who gave everything to a business she believed in, cut corners nobody could prove were wrong, and watched it collapse anyway, while a colleague who cut the same corners, maybe worse ones, is thriving 2 towns over. Once you notice the mismatch, the question changes shape. It's no longer just, what did I do? It becomes, why did it find me and not them? And somewhere underneath that question, another one waiting. Quieter, but persistent. Is he even good? Scripture has already staged this exact scene, not as commentary from a distance. A formal accusation, argued out loud by 3 men certain they'd found the sinner, and a suffering man who dared to ask the same question you just did. Why do the wicked prosper, while I've done nothing to deserve this? God's verdict on that argument might surprise you. His name was Job, And by every measure the old logic could offer, he shouldn't have been sitting there. He wasn't hiding anything. The text is blunt about it. Blameless. Not sinless in some abstract theological sense, but a man who feared God and turned from evil. And in a single day, he lost everything. Children, wealth, health, all of it. In a sequence that reads less like consequence and more like catastrophe, with no author he could name. So his friends came, and for chapter after chapter, they built him a case. Not out of cruelty, necessarily, out of the same arithmetic we've already seen. Obedience brings the harvest. Job has no harvest. Therefore, somewhere, there must be disobedience. They never find it. They can't. So instead they invent it. Hidden sin, secret pride, some debt he's not confessing. Because the alternative is worse than accusing him. The alternative is admitting the ledger doesn't always balance. They thought they were defending God. In reality, they were defending the ledger. Because if Job was innocent, then suffering could no longer be explained by arithmetic. And perhaps that's what frightened them most. Job refuses to confess to a crime he didn't commit. He argues back. He demands an answer. At points, he says things about God that sound almost like the accusation we heard a moment ago. Is he even good? And when God finally speaks, he doesn't answer the question Job asked. He doesn't explain the suffering. He doesn't hand over the ledger. But he does say one thing, plainly, at the very end, to the friends, not to Job. You have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. The men with the tidy theology, the ones certain that suffering proves guilt, are the ones God rebukes, not Job. Job, who raged and questioned and refused to accept a false explanation for his pain, is the one God calls right. So if the ledger doesn't explain Job's suffering, what explains obedience that leads to suffering anyway? Not despite it, through it. There's a night, centuries later, in a garden, where that question gets answered. Not in words, but in sweat like blood, and a prayer that doesn't get the answer it asked for, either. He already knew what was coming, not vaguely, specifically. The betrayal, the trial, the execution, none of it was a surprise. And he asked for it to stop. Let this cup pass. If the Mosaic Ledger were absolute, this is the moment it should have paid out. The only perfectly obedient life ever lived should have received the harvest. Instead, he received the cup. Not a small request, whispered once. The text says he asked repeatedly, his sweat falling like drops of blood. A body under a kind of strain most of us will never fully understand. And the answer he got back wasn't relief. The cup didn't pass. The suffering that followed, betrayal, abandonment, slow public execution, arrived exactly as he'd asked it not to. Here's the strange part. Scripture doesn't describe this as failed obedience. It describes it as the source of obedience. As if obedience itself had to be learned through exactly the thing Job's friends assumed obedience was supposed to prevent. Although he was a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered, not obedience rewarded by the absence of suffering. Obedience formed inside it, with no promise the pain would lift. Same word we started with, obedience. Isaiah's version, obey and eat well. Gethsemane's version, obey and still drink the cup. Which means the voice that told the smoker, the businesswoman, Job himself, that suffering was proof of failure, was wrong about something deeper than facts. It was wrong about the whole shape of obedience. Obedience was never a receipt for a painless life. It never was. So if suffering isn't what obedience prevents, and it isn't the debt God is collecting, then what happened to the debt at all? There's a verse people quote often, usually to comfort someone, sometimes without stopping to feel the size of what it's actually claiming. As far as the east is from the west, so far has he removed our transgressions from us. Not swept under something, not filed away. Not waiting to be brought back up if the circumstances turn bad enough, removed east from west, a distance that never meets. So here's the quiet question underneath all of this. If the debt is actually gone, not postponed, then what is the diagnosis, the empty chair, the ruined business, actually reporting on? Paul knew this tension personally, not in theory, in his own body. Something he calls a thorn in the flesh stayed with him, even after everything else in his life had been forgiven, redirected, rebuilt. He asked for it to be removed 3 times. 3 times I pleaded, but he said, "My grace is sufficient for you." Grace didn't remove the thorn, it removed the debt. Those are not the same miracle. It wasn't removed because Paul hadn't repented enough, not because some hidden sin still needed paying off. The text is explicit that this wasn't punishment. It was something else entirely, something suffering doesn't usually get credited with. It kept him tethered to grace instead of self-reliance. So the voice that keeps insisting you're still paying for it may be telling the truth about the pain. It is real. It is not telling the truth about what the pain means. Forgiveness was never a promise that the thorn comes out. It was a promise about the debt, and those are 2 different accounts entirely. But there's a danger on the other side of this too, because if forgiveness doesn't guarantee an easy life, it would be just as easy to swing the other way. To decide the pain must simply be God's will and stop asking questions about it at all. Scripture doesn't ask you to do that either. There's a whole collection of prayers that never made it into the greeting cards. Prayers that accuse, demand, even shout. How long, O Lord? No confession attached, no admission of secret sin. Just a direct question aimed straight at God. A third of the Psalms are built this way. Lament, protest, unresolved grief, thrown directly at God, sometimes without even the courtesy of a resolution. So the answer to my suffering isn't a punishment I'm still paying off, was never supposed to be, accept it quietly. Scripture doesn't ask for resignation. It makes room for rage, for confusion, for demanding an explanation that may never come. That's the difference between faith and fatalism. Fatalism says, this is deserved or decreed, so be still. Faith says, this is real. I don't understand it, and I'm bringing that straight to God instead of away from Him. Okay, so 2 verses, 2 versions of obedience. One says, obey and eat the harvest. The other says, obey and still drink the cup. Both are true. Neither cancels the other. The real question was never which one is correct. It's which one you're quietly living by when the harvest doesn't come. Perhaps that's why Horatio Spafford could stand over an ocean, knowing his daughters would never come home, and still write, "It is well with my soul." Oh, not because he understood, not because the harvest returned, but because somewhere between the harvest and the cup, he discovered that God's love had never been measured by either. Maybe that's the invitation of the gospel, not to pretend suffering isn't real. Not to stop asking why, but to stop asking whether every sorrow is God collecting payment for a debt Christ has already carried. The harvest may come, the cup may come first, but the ledger was closed at the cross. And perhaps that changes not only how we suffer, but who we believe God to be. The Constant North. Subscribe, follow, and share for more.